this event and in other events that we've had, and we appreciate your support. Thank you, John.
Thank you. On behalf of Chicago's Jewish United Fund, I want to bring greetings and welcome you all to what is a beautiful day in Chicago. Thank you for inviting me. We are huge fans of the Academic Engagement Network. We've seen your progress over the past, I think it's been 4 years now, and it's significant, and you're making a huge impact. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Richard Herdman. I don't know that everybody here knows that Richard got married last Wednesday. Mazel tov, dear Richard. Richard may... No gifts. Richard may look a few years older than I am, but he's beginning to act younger than I am. So I think many of you actually some of you may have been involved, I think it might have been 4 or 5 years back, when the Modern Language Association, the MLA, had a conference in Chicago, and they were contemplating supporting an academic boycott of Israel. And I mentioned that one, my mentor in this role was Michael Kotzen, of blessed memory. I know many of you in this room were very close to him, and he was very active in organizing that. And in fact, we had kind of at JUF for many, many years, Michael supported kind of an informal gathering of academics in Chicago, and it was that nucleus that really, and others who fought successfully the MLA resolution. That's a whole nother topic, not for today. But we were really glad to hand over the reins of that committee. We don't meet it anymore because it's superfluous, because of the wonderful work that you're doing. So JUF is widely regarded as North America's premier federation. And when you're a community professional, I think maybe sometimes when you're an academic, when you're a university administrator, you don't get to brag a lot. People just want to tell you all the things you're doing wrong. Actually, when I go to shul on Shabbos, I actually leave early because invariably everyone wants to tell me how to do my job better. But this is a friendly audience. I just want to tell you a couple of significant things about Chicago's JUF. So last year we had $192 million of revenue, and we were able to push about $302 million out the door. Most of that goes to support social welfare for Jews and non-Jews in Chicago and around the world. We're especially proud that we continue to be a major supporter of Mount Sinai Hospital, which operates on the Near West Side, which serves almost exclusively minority community. Their biggest problem is they save the lives of gunshot victims. They don't save the lives of billionaires. So the people who they say aren't able to contribute, and so our support is really critical there. We also last year, as an example, distributed more than $2 million in disaster relief aid to all the different natural disasters, primarily in America. We simply open up a lockbox and tell people we're doing it, and it's a demonstration of the fact that people in Chicago really do trust us. We support Jewish life globally, whether it's in America, Chicago, a lot of efforts going on in Eastern Europe and in Latin America right now, and especially Israel. One of the things that we don't do when it comes to people who need our help with regard to social welfare, we don't have a litmus test for your political beliefs. And we also don't ask what your zip code is, what side of what line that you live on, because a person in need is a person in need, and we think that's a critical value to uphold. I don't need to tell people in this room that we live in a pretty divisive world, and so how do we deal with that? And I know, Andreas, I'm looking at you, and I feel the collective pain in terms of how we deal with our different stakeholders. We say to our stakeholders, watch what we do. It's much more important than what you want us to say. Increasingly in today's world, our stakeholders want us to assume and validate their own political beliefs. And I think that's something that we're all experiencing. Hopefully there is a center that comes back, but currently we're not going in a great direction. One thing we did take a strong position on was DACA. We may believe in people may believe in secure borders, but we believe that immigrants need to be able to immigrate into this country. Anyone who understands Jewish history understands how important it is to have open borders. We make a huge investment on campus. I think many of you know we're very involved, and I have some colleagues over here in not just fighting BDS, but in supporting vibrant Jewish life on campus and support for Israel, especially amongst Jewish but non-Jewish students as well. We invest, and this is unprecedented in North America, over $7 million on building Jewish life on campuses. We're doing that on 17 campuses. Obviously, the largest investment is Hillel. We had one of the senior administrators, I gotta switch between all the different things I do. One of the senior executives from Hillel in town a couple of weeks ago, and she said, to my team, she says, you guys are running the most outstanding Hillels in the country. And we're doing it on 17 campuses, and we're very proud of that. We're especially proud, and I know, LNCU and the people from all different universities here, but we have a thing that we built called Metro Chicago Hillel, which operates on 9 commuter campuses. And those of you who know anything about Jewish life on campus, especially commuter campuses, it's virtually impossible to do a great job because of the nature of commuter campuses in large urban areas. Well, we experimented a few years ago with a thing called Base Hillel. It's actually called Silverstein Base Hillel. We had a major donor. Donors are always a good thing. And the basic idea is we put a senior Jewish educator and her spouse, so a rabbi and her spouse, in a home. A best way to describe it is we're out Chabad in Chabad in terms of the interaction between students. We didn't put it on a campus. We put it in a neighborhood where commuter students where they tend to have fun. This one's in Lincoln Park. We opened up a second one in 910 South Michigan to serve the South Loop and West Loop. And the metrics, and we're very metric oriented, the metrics are exceptional. We actually received an award for being one of the most innovative ideas in the Jewish world last year, called a Springboard Award. Very exciting. We hope to open more of those. And also, and this is also one of Michael Kotzen's legacies, we're supporting several postdocs on 4 campuses, the 4 largest campuses in Illinois, in Israel and Jewish studies. So I will say I'm not used to speaking in front of people who get paid to speak for a living. I was never very academic. Somehow Northwestern Law School gave me a degree. They would not give me a degree today because I think actually second year I had a full-time job and didn't show up on campus for 7 weeks. I do have all new molars from grinding my teeth, and I still wake up with that nightmare of not being ready for an exam. I think it's PTSD. But I mention that in the context that back in November of 16, I was able to travel with Governor Ronner, the deputy governor, and 6 or 7 academics from U of I. I'm used to being in the room where I'm not the smartest person. I was really apprehensive because I've never really been in the room where I felt that everyone else in the room was brilliant. And we spent 4 days in really wonderful meetings with Israeli academics and Israeli heads of universities. And I know that Jeff Brown's going to talk a little bit about that, and Andreas mentioned it. And unfortunately, you didn't get to meet Ed Seidel, who's kind of the brainchild, or the person who's tasked with executing the initiative. But it was, and I've been to Israel over 60 times, I think. I actually lost count. But it was one of the most exceptional professional experiences I've ever had, and one of the most exceptional trips to Israel. And I don't want to talk a lot about the DPI other than to say it is a brilliant, brilliant idea. Anyone that cares about all the nexuses, it's the best idea I think we have going for us in the state today. What I do want to say is Andreas, Jeff, and Ed, being with them and seeing the decency and the fairness and the way they looked at issues in a critical, open way was an eye-opening experience with me. And the reason for AEN, Ken, that we have, if we had leaders in academia like the three of them, we would have no reason to exist. We should be really grateful. And it's not just that they're supportive of us. And I say this all the time. We're not asking, as a Jewish community, for anything exceptional. We're not asking for special treatment. We're actually asking to be treated the same as everyone else on campus. But they also have what I would say is courage, because they've really spoken out aggressively on our issues. So look, there is no better way to defeat BDS than to encourage bilateral relationships and investment and research, you name it, between Israel and America. Israel being invited in to be the first partner of the DPI, you don't need me to comment on that. But what I do want to comment is one of the, and Andreas was talking about this issue, it was one of the things that I learned, because it really is mutually beneficial. The relationship is not out of the goodness of our hearts. Everyone does have good hearts, but this is business, and this is really good business. And most of the times I was in the room, I had no idea what they were talking about. Andreas, Jeff, I could understand some of the things you were talking about. I do have a business background. Most of my career has been in entrepreneurship. But when you start talking about the things that you do, I need like a translation. But one of the things that I did learn, which I walked away from, is Israel being the startup nation, they've had to adapt. And when you talk, and I think Governor Ronner talks about the fact, and I heard this speech I think a dozen times, enjoyed it every time. Of the 100 top companies on NASDAQ, 40 of them have their origins at the University of Illinois. But Israel has a way of commercializing ideas, and when every meeting that we had, when an academic has a concept, an idea, before they do the research on it and before the university decides to fund it, they actually have that academic sit down with people who are experts in intellectual property and people that are experts in how to commercialize the idea. And that's one of the things that has led to, in my view, part of the success. And so I think that American academic institutions have a lot to learn about Israel. So as I said, there's no better way to defeat BDS than to encourage relationships between Americans and Israelis. Just an interesting fact, last year, I think about every year, about 325,000 students in undergraduate study abroad in other countries. I think the leading countries are England, probably because of English, Spain, and Italy because of the food and the wine and everything else. Only about 3,000 students study abroad in Israel. And it should be a lot higher for a number of reasons. First of all, they have the best beaches in the world, and no matter where you are in Israel, unless maybe you're down at Ben Gurion, you're never more than 20 or 30 minutes away from the beach. And with the Tel Aviv, there is no city, I think, that's more fun in the world today. And with the European Travel Pass, you actually can fly anywhere from Tel Aviv to anywhere in Europe for about $400 a semester. So we're working hard with the consulate and other organizations to try and encourage travel to Israel. We also, this past year, and we'll do again this year, we're going to take about 100 to 125 students to Israel on 5 different trips of undergraduates, campus influentials, most of whom are not Jewish. And what's fascinating about this experience, it's 20 non-Jews, 5 Jews. They get to plan where they go. And those of you who know Emily Briskman was telling me that you were in Ramallah, and actually the students wanted to go to Ramallah and meet with Palestinians, and the security people were really good at security. The security people up said, no, we're not going to Ramallah. And I think Emily realized that they're walking through the streets of Ramallah with no security. It all went well, we're happy you're back. But I think that here's the key point. Of the 150 or so students that we've taken to Israel, and we take students who are involved in SJP,
We just have to get ourselves comfortable that they have an open mind. With the exception of, I think, one student, they all come back saying, I may not agree with everything, but the issue is complicated and BDS doesn't belong on campus, and especially in student governments and student referendums. So, I want to leave you with three basic thoughts. The first is that while Hillel, and I think this is relevant as academics in the room, while Hillel may own the fight against BDS on campus, it can't win the fight against BDS on campus. And what do I mean by that? The BDS and student government isn't the real fight that's going on campus today. The real effort on campus is to disenfranchise Jewish students, to make them pariahs, to make them uncomfortable in their own skin. And it's all tied to identity politics, it's all tied to intersectionality and what we call white privilege. The real fight is in getting administrators and university administrations to understand our issues. And that's proving to be really difficult. And so why is it that Hillel can't be really successful there? Well, the first reason is our Hillel execs, as permanent residents of the university culture and members of the university community, they have so many different issues going on. And they're looking at having these really important ongoing relationships. And at the end of the day, I think that they get compromised. They sometimes can't have those really hard discussions that need to be had with university administrators. And I point to what we all read about with the student who wanted to travel to Israel at the University of Michigan. The first response from the university, I'd say, was parv. It was mixed. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. 2 weeks later, the response was really good. Well, what happened in between? And I think I can tell you what happened. I don't have firsthand knowledge, but just a little bit of common sense helps here. I'm told that of the $5 billion that the University of Michigan raised in the last few years in their capital endowment campaign, about half of it came from Jewish sources. And I'm pretty sure that some of those people called up and said, and so my point is this. I think that administrators get confused sometimes because by and large, they don't know what anti-Semitism is. They don't know how to dissect or differentiate between what is legitimate criticism of Israel and what is hate speech. On a public university, all hate speech is permissible.
Right.
Okay, but it doesn't mean that the university can't respond to it. Now, obviously, hate speech where there's an immediate threat of harm or danger to property, that is actionable, that's criminal. But university administrators are just not, and I don't think it's that they're not able. I think in most cases it's that they don't want to. And it's really easy when Jews get murdered in a synagogue in Pittsburgh for people to stand up and say this is evil and we're condemn it. But it's a lot harder when things that ought not to be nuanced become nuanced. So what are examples of that? When a Jewish student gets removed from a committee by a senior administrator, a student committee, because she's Jewish and therefore biased, and admits to that fact, to me personally, that's anti-Semitism. But university doesn't see it that way. When Jewish students are removed from student clubs because they're Zionists, that's anti-Semitism. And when Zionists are compared to fascists, that's anti-Semitism. And those are things that are happening on all of our campuses all the time. And what we've learned is that being called a Zionist is a euphemism for being a Jew. And so I just want to say to this group, those of you in this room who are active in AAN, you're absolutely critical to getting that, to making those points on campus. My second point, we have a real structural disadvantage when it comes to dealing with our issues on campus. Why? I think because of Hillel. And here's what I mean by that. Hillel actually was founded down in Champaign in 1921. We're going to be celebrating our 100th anniversary. Very exciting stuff. We actually just got the street named that Hillel's on at U of I by the founder of Hillel. But Hillel exists for a historical reason. And that's because we were excluded by other organizations on campus, so we created Hillel. Well, there are repercussions, and there's an impact of that today. So I went on their website at U of I to see what the funding was and what the support was for other minority groups on campus. U of I has 12 centers for minority groups on campus. Blacks, Latinos, LGBTQ, Asians, Native Americans, women. They don't have a Jewish center. We're an ethnicity, we're a minority, and the university doesn't invest $1 in the same way that it's investing in every other organization, because we've done the work for the university. And we're investing as a community about $1.6 million in Hillel. My guess is, Chabad is another $750,000. Am I close on that, Richard? Yep. So we're making this investment, but it's not about the money. We're not at the table. So, and a public university, there's separation of church and state, and it's worse at private universities where all the chaplains are on the university payroll, with a few exceptions. The rabbi, whether it's the Chabad or the Hillel rabbi, is on the staff. But when they sit down and deal with their issues, we're not there. And it gets worse because we all know that there are members of administrations that actually think that Jews are the problem on campus, and we're not there to dissuade them in the room and say, no, that's not the case. So I don't know how to fix that, but I think that AEN is a critical part of that discussion. There's, by the way, a corollary to that, and that is that every other group gets to define what hatred is when it comes to them. When it comes to Jews, we're the only group that doesn't get to define what hatred is. Other people define it for us. And that's wrong too. The third issue, and the most pernicious issue, and this is where I'm done making excuses for university administrators. I've lost all patience, and those of you who know me well are going to hear a completely different tone coming from JUF. And that is, universities, by and large, have absolutely no training when it comes to bias with regard to anti-Jewish and anti-Semitism. And that's outrageous. That is absolutely outrageous. And I was looking, I think last week, it was the FBI statistics on hate crime came out. And okay, look, they're not perfect. We don't know how many crimes get reported, but it's a pretty good data point. So the numbers, hate crimes get divided into 3 categories: race, ethnicity, and ancestry, religion, and sexual orientation. So 7,175 hate crimes reported, a little over 4,100 were with regard to race, ethnicity, and ancestry. Religion was 1,500, sexual orientation was 1,100. But that's not the key statistics. Key statistics are the 2013 hate crimes were directed against Black African Americans, but the second largest group of hate crimes were Jews, and we were at 938, and no one else was close. So, can you imagine at your universities where there's no anti-bias training when it comes to sexual orientation? Sure. There would be absolute outrage. Can you imagine no bias training when it comes to racism? Outrage. But somehow, we're there begging for training when it comes to anti-Semitism, and we all know what's going on with the rise of anti-Semitism on campus. And we're begging and begging and begging, we're offering to pay for it, and nothing. And I feel like we just get patted on the head. So, it could be benign neglect, but I'm beginning to think it's either incompetence, or in some cases, I think university administrators are just against us. So, I think we have a huge mountain to climb, but with your help, we'll succeed.
Great.
Do we have time? A couple questions?
A couple minutes for questions.
Okay.
Thank you
Ellen.
very much. Thank you so much for this talk. It's critically important, but I'd also want to speak about there are 26 states that have now passed officially one of 4 types of anti-BDS legislation. I have gone through those very, very, very carefully, in which the majority of those states that have the legislation have defined anti-Semitism in that piece of legislation. Second of all, What is not getting coverage is the growing number of brave municipalities which have now defined anti-Semitism, and this was their original reason, because police are not aware when there is a hate crime what to look for, and thus, if there is a policy or program, they needed a definition and a system of implementation and evaluation in order to say, is there a decline by our police response? In those cities such as Val Harbor, in which a very wonderful head of Val Harbor's government in Florida, his name is Matt Groyson, he wrote that legislation. And what did he adopt it from? From the failed legislation that did not pass in the federal government. This is to say, we are doing brilliantly with innovative techniques at the state and municipal level that our community is not aware of. The last thing I would like to share with you is that I urge people to consider doing what I did. For me, the issue of Pittsburgh and the mass slaughtering was a terrible, terrible reflection of what all of us in this room know is going on. My response was to write a detailed letter to the president of my university requesting a meeting to define for us the learning module that must be put in place for all students, for all people in personnel administrative things, just like they did in Val Harbor for the police. What do we look at? How do we know what to address? When is the line crossed, when isn't it? And how does this not, or does it square with First Amendment rights as being claimed? And I got back the most beautiful letter from the president of my school. We are meeting December 18th. The chair of my department is coming, and the head of police are coming as well. This is also a public safety issue. So I am encouraged by our wonderful energy that AEN has provided us as faculty of what we can do, of what we can request at our universities. And now the point is to do it. And I am very, 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 very hopeful that we maintain positive, constructive responses, such as the development of modules. I put together a booklet of the module on homophobia, the module on LGBTQ, the module on racism and sexual harassment, and showing that there is no module for us. That is presented as an exhibit. They need to see the omission, not take your word for it. They need the data, the program itself. So I want to give everybody a yasher koach and to say keep going in that direction, and to thank, I know you for so long, and your work is it's just fantastic. And what Ken Walter and AEN have done for us is just remarkable. And it's the first chapter of our courage and the movement of it. So let's keep going in that direction.
Ellen, thank you. I'm going to give you my mother's phone number. You made great points. Two quick things. There is federal legislation that is making its way through.
Ken Marcus.
Yes. Well, Ken Marcus is at the Justice Department, but defining anti-Semitism. I think it's a little bit complicated on campus because because free speech is really important. The other thing is Israel Action Network has a key role in this, and I think that what we need to do a better job of is we don't speak with one voice.
Right.
And me and some other people are beginning to have that discussion about how can we get the different organizations to speak with one voice. Charles, and then I think we need to move on, but go ahead.
I want to make 3 quick points. The first is when Jewish faculty are asked what can they do, I think the single most important thing is to stand up and be visible as a Jewish faculty who is pro-Zion. Okay? That's so much more important than anything else. it just sets an example, and it tells students that it's a legitimate thing to do. I think the second issue really is that we need to be able to stand up, identify our issue, and be proud of who we are without becoming a victims group. We are victimized sometimes, but the whole point of college orientation now is to segregate students into their appropriate victims group, or if they do not fit into one, then they are an oppressor. And an oppressor would be defined as typically any person who is white and might have at least and have two parents. The parents could be a coal miner, but they would be privileged. They could have escaped the Holocaust. They would be privileged. It's all bullshit, and people should be called on it. But I would like to hear your views on how we can articulate a position where we advance and we are a kind of grouping in one sense without this sense that we're a victims group. I think it's the route to ruin.
Charles, first of all, you shaped a lot of my thinking over the last several years, so thank you. The issue of victimhood. I majored in history in undergraduate. Actually, my fun fact, I majored in American Women's history. Jews, we will never be victims again. And we will never have, and what I think in our DNA is that we never have a victim mentality. And that's why we've overcome the different things that we've had, that we've dealt with historically. You know, look, I'm a realist, and right now the issues that you raised of intersectionality and oppression and white privilege, that's a force of nature, and I can't see anything that we can do in the short term to change that, to change the direction. That's the political landscape, and it appears it's going to be the shape of the issue of the next presidential campaign. It is absurd because as Jews, even the most secular Jew on campus, or Jewish student, we share the most progressive views of any population, and we actually fight for it. We stand up for other groups, we care about them, and the fact that we're being excluded is what's so outrageous. So I do think that the message to campus administrators is we do need their help there, and we're actually, in the Outstanding Hills, we're working with Jewish students and teaching them, fight your way into those groups, because don't, I think, who used this phrase, it was a wonderful phrase, McCoy, I think, don't allow others to take away your joy. And Jewish students.
The key word is equality. When marriage for gays was defined as marriage equality, game over.
So look,
If you're excluded and you define it as an issue not of being a victim, but of wanting equality, you win.
we just want the same treatment. But with that, I'm going to end because Jeff Brown is here, and I think I don't want to cut 3 seconds into his time. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for those important remarks, and thank you, Ellen and Charles, for your thoughtful responses. I now want to introduce Jeff Brown, who is the Dean of the College of Business at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He also serves as Director of the National Bureau of Economic Research, Retirement Research Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he is a member of AEM's advisory board, so thank you, Jeff.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here. And before I go further, I actually want to thank John for his very kind remarks he made about me and my colleagues on our trip to Israel. And while he may have been not always able to follow all the conversations that Andreas was having, and neither could I will say that being with John in Israel was like taking a master class on the history and culture and politics of Israel. And so it was a real honor for me to be on that trip with him, so thank you. I also want to thank AEN for sponsoring this event and thank my colleagues from the University of Illinois, some of whom you've heard from and some of whom you will hear from later this afternoon. And I'm certainly honored to be part of this. I wanted to just focus my remarks on a really simple question, which is, why is it that the Gies College of Business, where I serve as dean, has chosen to proactively engage with Israel? Now, my main response to this is deceptively simple. In fact, I could answer it in a single tweet, which is to say that engaging with Israel is going to help the College of Business achieve our vision of leading the world in innovation. Now, I've been given 45 minutes here. I'm not going to use it all to talk. I want to have some interaction as opposed to just 280 characters in a tweet. So I hope you won't mind if I spend a little bit more time going into a little more depth about what I just said, as well as highlighting some of the successes we've had so far, but in addition, some of the challenges that I think we face going forward, some of which John alluded to in his remarks. And I think this is especially important because our decision to proactively engage with Israel is obviously not without its critics on our campus. So when I became dean 3.5 years ago, I spent a lot of time thinking about how we could really differentiate ourselves as a college of business from the hundreds of other colleges out there and from the couple of dozen or so schools that we consider to be our peers. And I really wanted to leverage the enormous strength that the University of Illinois as a whole brought to the table for us. And if you spend any time on our campus at all or read much about the University of Illinois, you'll know that this block I that I'm wearing, while it stands for Illinois, could just as easily stand for innovation. After all, this is where Andreas says we invented air conditioning. On our campus. It's where the MRI was developed, where the first web browser was created, where YouTube was launched, where Tesla Motors got its start. And I only learned at our commencement ceremony this last May, it is also the alma mater of the marketing genius who was behind the 1970s hit product, the Chia Pet. So given this very rich legacy of innovation, I made a pretty early decision as I was even going through the process of essentially applying for the dean's job that I really wanted to increase our focus on both the teaching of and the practice of innovation. And so as I alluded to earlier, our official vision for the Gies College of Business is to lead the world in innovation and life-changing access to business education. So I like to think we're already doing this in a lot of ways. And I'm not going to turn this into a sales pitch for my college, but I'll just point out two examples. One is we've just rolled out an entirely new undergraduate core curriculum that provides every single student in our college, regardless of their major, with a full year of business analytics training, with experiential learning opportunities, client-based projects, and so forth. As another example, just 3 years ago, not even 3 years ago, we launched an innovative IMBA program, which was really the world's first MOOC-based online MBA program, and we did it in a way that really got the world's attention because you can now get your MBA from the University of Illinois for only $22,000. These are examples of being innovative, and I think in order to be innovative, you have to learn to think differently, to challenge the status quo, and to constantly expose yourself to new ideas. So how does one go about doing this? Well, one way is to engage with the world, and in particular to intentionally seek out ideas from people and countries and cultures and religions and ideologies that differ from our own. And it's not enough to just read about it. I think you actually have to immerse yourself in it, to spend time with people and organizations that share a passion for innovation, who have a track record for doing it well, spend time meeting face to face, talking to the thinkers, talking to the doers, and really challenging each other's assumptions along the way, as well as understanding the context in which the innovation takes place. Now, in the US, when you think about innovation, what does everybody immediately think of as Silicon Valley? They should think about the University of Illinois, but everyone thinks about Silicon Valley. If you press them further, people will talk about the Boston area, especially in biotech and so forth. And as you heard from Andreas and others earlier, we have this vision of catapulting Chicago into that sphere, into that realm of leading innovation hubs through the Discovery Partners Institute. Now, if you look outside of the US, a lot of people immediately think of China, which I think in recent years has very noticeably moved from being a center of manufacturing to really being a center of innovation. And I see that every time that I go to Shanghai. And even though our governments have a lot of disagreements and in fact are engaged in a trade war right now, I consider engagement with China to be absolutely essential to a well-rounded business education, especially if we're trying to focus on innovation. Well, similarly, there are a few places that are like Israel, and Tel Aviv in particular, in terms of being a center for entrepreneurial thinking. I mean, there's a reason that Israel is known as the startup nation or the innovation nation. As you know all the statistics probably better than I do, how there are more entrepreneurs per capita in Israel than any other country on earth. The number of medical breakthroughs that are literally saving lives around the world, technological advances that are changing everything from how we drive to how we communicate with each other. And there's such a high concentration of high quality universities, and just the sheer number of new startups in Israel makes it an entrepreneurial ecosystem that really is unlike any other in the world. So my view is very simple. If the Geese College of Business wants to achieve its vision of leading the world in the thinking about and the teaching and the practice of innovation, we need to interact and engage with the world's most innovative ecosystems, and this includes Israel. And I actually think that to ignore Israel, or to ignore China for that matter, would essentially be intellectual malpractice on our part. So in the last couple of years, I formed some working groups of faculty, staff, students, as well as some other experts. One was focused on China, one focused on Israel. And I gave these working groups explicit charges to look for ways that we could really ramp up our level of engagement. And I want to say that for the Israeli working group, we did have, it included Erez Cohen, who is the director of Hillel at the University of Illinois, as well as Rabbi David Techtel of the Illini Chabad. And they were both absolutely fantastic partners, not just because of the knowledge and the networks that they brought, but because I think with both of them, what you really see, if you spend time with either one of them, is just the tremendous passion they have for the well-being of our students and the student experience. And I have certainly valued our collaborations, and even more so, I think, our friendship, both individually as well as our organizations. And so, based on what these working groups have suggested, I think we've made a lot of progress in a very short period of time, although there's much more progress that lies ahead of us. So as you know, the mission of our university, and the mission of most universities, is around teaching, research, public engagement, and then for the University of Illinois as a public institution, we also talk a lot about economic development, especially for the state. And so I just want to give you an example of things that I think we've accomplished along each of those core missions over the last couple of years with regard to our engagement with Israel. So on the teaching front, we've been expanding our study abroad opportunities with Israel. You're going to hear later today a panel discussion. Professor Martinez, who's here with us, Professor Robin Metzger is going to be coming in. I believe one of our students hopefully is going to make it here. I think the rabbi might be coming. They all went on this study abroad trip that we sponsored last spring break of our James Scholars students. Now this is part of our honors program. And you'll be hearing a lot more about it, but it was really a transformational experience for the students who were over there. About 40 students went. I think only 2 of the 40 were Jewish. And I think the other 38, it was the first time for all of them visiting Israel. This year, we're sending another large group. It's what's called our Emerging Business Leaders Group. This is a program that we have that is really focused on providing a little extra support for students who come from underrepresented groups or our first-generation college students. For many of them, this is going to be their first trip ever outside of the United States. And what better place to do that, in my opinion, than Israel? On the research front, we've sent a number of Geese faculty to Israel over the last couple of years to participate in various conferences and seminars. Got another one coming up in 2 weeks at the Collier School of Management. Is hosting a finance conference, and we have one of our faculty members going over there to present some research. We've also increased our efforts to bring Israeli scholars to our university. And this year, due to essentially it all comes down to money, right? I made some special funding available to the departments if they wanted to bring some scholars to campus. And we have 4 units within our business administration department, organizational behavior and strategy and so forth. And each one of them is bringing in a scholar, interestingly, each from a different Israeli university this year to present their research. And my hope, obviously, and our hope, is that these kinds of engagements will lead to further sort of organic collaborations that will grow over time. And obviously, when you can get faculty working together and sort of on their own identifying opportunities for collaboration, that's a much more long-lasting type of engagement that you can get just from sort of forcing things down from the top. With regard to public engagement, we've been bringing speakers to campus, some of them controversial. So for example, last spring, in collaboration with the College of Law and the Illini Chabad, we brought Alan Dershowitz to campus. And part of his remarks were focused on essentially what I would characterize as a defense of Israel and criticizing the BDS movement. Earlier this semester, we welcome, and I may not say his name right, but Moise Novan of Mobileye. He's sometimes known as the rabbi of Mobileye, to campus, and he gave a talk in the College of Business as well about entrepreneurship and technology and so forth. Then with regard to economic development, you've already heard that we sent this delegation of university officials to Israel last year, along with John and along with Governor Rauner and others. And I was pleased to be part of that. And we signed memoranda of understanding with 4 of the leading higher ed universities in Israel to essentially pave the way for additional partnerships going forward. And we're really excited that Tel Aviv, I think, is the first, and there'll probably be more universities to engage in our Discovery Partners Institute, which we're really hoping, you've already heard a lot about that, so I won't repeat it, but we're really hoping helps to encourage economic development and entrepreneurship and innovation here in Chicago. Now, the good news is, at least it's good news for me as a dean, is that within the Geese College of Business community, our faculty, our staff, our students, and our alumni, these initiatives have all been, I think, greeted very positively. Essentially, I've gotten no real negative feedback from our own community. But, of course, as with, I think, most great ideas and innovations, it is not without its critics, more often than not from outside of our own college. And I just want to say that as far as I'm concerned, our engagement with Israel, just like our engagement with China or our connections to Silicon Valley, makes strategic sense for us as a school. And I would do it whether or not there were controversies on campus about BDS. That was not really what drove the conversation. I will say, though, that the University of Illinois for the last 2 years has had BDS referendum on campus, as is happening across the U.S. And so I think what that changes for me is it makes me feel like I have an additional obligation to be very public about the type of engagement that we are involved with in order to tell the positive story about what that engagement can do. Now, I think they shared with you a letter that I wrote to our Daily Illini, which is our student newspaper on campus last spring, when I essentially stated that, as far as I was concerned, that engagement and dialogue are core values of the university, and that I personally felt that the BDS movement ran counter to that. But, I think that was a tiny little piece of what was really an overall very impressive effort by Hillel and the overall Jewish community on campus. And as a result of all of those activities, we were pleased that the referendum was voted down by approximately a 2-to-1 margin, and actually by a larger margin than the first year it was around. But here's the problem. Every year on our campuses, more than a quarter of the students graduate and move on, and when we bring all these new faces onto campus, so you got to do the education all over again, right? And the concern that I have, and I mean a number of us have talked about this, is if we wait until there's a BDS movement on campus and then you're playing reactive sort of education, the risk of losing that, I think, is magnified. And frankly, I think we've just missed a big opportunity. So rather than being reactive and playing defense all the time, I think it's important that we invest in continually telling the story about the benefits that engagement with Israel brings. And that's why we're not only trying to do these things, we're trying to tell the world that we're doing them, and not just on campus, but our alumni community and so forth. And whether it's through additional study abroad trips, more faculty research collaborations, whether it's through joint activities at the DPI, I think the more that we can tell these stories and why this engagement is good for us, good for our students, good for our alumni, good for the state of Illinois, the more we've created a fertile ground for when these kind of issues do come up. Now, telling this story is going to also hopefully help us when we need to combat the more pernicious issue on campus, which is the existence of anti-Semitism on our campus and on others. Now, before I go further, I feel it necessary to say, first of all, I'm not Jewish. It is not my job to define anti-Semitism. But I do want to state that I do recognize that one can be pro-BDS without necessarily being anti-Semitic. And in fact, I have sat down for coffee with the leading proponent of BDS on our campus, who, by the way, complicates our life a little bit because he happens to be a professor of religion who is himself Jewish. And we've spent a lot of time together talking about these issues. Now, suffice it to say that I didn't change his mind, he didn't change mine, but I will say that after spending time with him, regardless of what you think about his views or his tactics, I think he's actually quite genuine in his view that, in his mind, some of the activities that the Israeli government engages in, some of its policies, in his worldview are immoral, and he has the right to oppose this and to suggest that we boycott them. Now, in the true spirit of AEN's advocacy of free speech and of academic freedom, I will be among the first to stand up and defend his right to do that. And I will defend his right to speak out. I will defend his right to pursue a BDS movement if that's what he or others want to do. But while I recognize that a BDS movement is not necessarily in and of itself anti-Semitic, I think we as university leaders do have a responsibility to recognize that even if it's not the intention of all of the BDS proponents to be anti-Semitic, it has the effect of essentially stirring the pot of anti-Semitism on campus, and there's some evidence that these type of events tend to be more frequent when these debates are going on campus. So as far as I'm concerned, our job every day is to find ways of making our campus simply a less hospitable, less welcoming place for a BDS movement to take root in the first place. And that requires sort of constant engagement and constant vigilance, not just reacting when these issues come up. So how do we do this? Well, some cases are obvious, right? Just in the last week, we had an episode that made the papers where there's some underground tunnels on campus that I didn't even know existed, and they found a swastika on a wall. Right? Last year we had a case where somebody spray painted a swastika on the main university library. As John said, these things are not only hateful and not only anti-Semitic, they're also illegal because they're destroying property. And I think pretty much everybody would agree, or most reasonable people would agree, that those ought to be penalized to the fullest extent of the law. The harder questions are what to do in the face of really divisive, unwelcome, uncomfortable, but nonetheless constitutionally protected speech when it happens on campus. And as much as any of us might get angry or upset if somebody waves a bloody Israeli flag at an event, or as much as we might be upset if somebody sends a mean-spirited tweet about the prime minister, those are forms of speech that are protected. I mean, keep in mind that in the US, the Supreme Court's decided that you can burn an American flag as a form of protected speech. And so, we're not going to be able, as a university, to prohibit a student from engaging in that kind of free expression. So what do we do when somebody does this? Well, one of my favorite lines, you've all heard it before, it's been around for a very long time, is that the best antidote to offensive speech is more speech. And as university leaders, we actually have very powerful voices with which to speak. Sometimes we don't always use them as effectively as we should. But, while we're not allowed to penalize offensive speech, we are permitted, in fact, I think we should more often use our own voices to forcefully speak against anti-Semitism, just as we should be speaking forcefully against Islamophobia or racism or sexism or discrimination against the LGBT community or any other marginalized group. Now, this is not about creating safe spaces, right? Let me be clear. I'm not advocating safe spaces on campus where people are not exposed to controversial ideas. In fact, I tell our incoming students in the Gies College of Business every single year that if they graduate in 4 years and they haven't had their core beliefs challenged while they've been on campus, we haven't done our jobs. All right? As far as I'm concerned, part of education is not just putting knowledge in people's heads, it's really getting them to examine their core beliefs and to question them. And by the way, that goes both ways. I think it's a healthy thing on campus for our Jewish students to be exposed to the fact that there are people who don't like the policies of the Israeli government. Just as, I don't mean this to be overly controversial, but just as it is completely fair game on a university campus to have a robust conversation and discussion about who is to blame when a police officer in the United States kills an unarmed black teen, I think it is also perfectly fair game that when a member of the Israeli Defense Force shoots an unarmed Palestinian teenager in Gaza, you ought to be allowed to have the debate on campus about that and about the morality of that and so forth, right? I'm not taking a side on this. I'm just saying that these are issues that can and should be discussed on our campus. But, and this is important, the other part of what I tell our students is that it is the values of the Gies College of Business and the University of Illinois that these debates need to be done in a respectful manner that essentially respects the humanity of your opponent. The discussions can be intense, they can be emotional, but they need to focus on the issues, not on personal attacks or targeted hate speech at one another. Now, truth is, many of the students that come to our campus, they don't understand this, right? They're 18-year-olds. Most of them are still kids, right? At least they're younger than my kids, so I get to call them kids. They come from a wide variety of ideologies and religions and nationalities and socioeconomic backgrounds. And for many of them, it is the first time they've been in an environment as diverse as the one that you will find at the University of Illinois. And so part of our job as a university is to help them try to navigate these issues. And frankly, it's hard. It's hard work. And sometimes members of our community don't always live up to our standards. I've unfortunately had too many instances where I've had to deal with cases where a student has engaged in behavior that at minimum was insensitive and offensive, and at worst, was pretty clearly anti-Semitic. And fortunately, when these events occur, I do have people like Erez Cohen and Rabbi David and others that I can work with in order to turn this into what we call a teachable moment for the students involved. And you know what, more often than not, and so far I haven't had a counterexample to this, maybe I'm just fortunate, but in almost every case that we've worked with, the student was just kind of, frankly, pretty naive and didn't fully realize the extent to which their actions or their words or their behavior or their social media posts was so offensive and why. And as we used it as an opportunity to teach them, they learned from it, I think that's a good outcome. That's what we're there to do. But as John said, I think this is why we can't just, again, wait for these events to happen. We need to be proactive in terms of anti-bias training of our faculty, our staff, and our students. Now, we've started a little bit of this in my college. We've not gone nearly far enough, but we worked with Erez Cohen to do some training on anti-Semitism and just more generally about Jewish life and so forth among our faculty and staff. We also then brought in someone to do a similar training on the religion of Islam. We encourage our faculty and our staff to come to that, so at least makes them a little bit more aware of the issues. But we haven't done it with our students, and we certainly haven't done it at a campus level with our students, and I'm hoping that we will get there. I frankly too share some of the frustration at how slow things happen on university campuses, but I continue to be optimistic that we will get there. So my basic view is that students need to be comfortable with who they are and feel safe as a person, even while we're making them intellectually uncomfortable by challenging their ideas. Now, I think in order to do that, if you do that successfully, you can then get students to sort of look beyond themselves, to really understand the broader world in which they live in, and go out and make a positive difference. And I just want to close with one more sort of story here, and it's at our naming celebration last year. So Larry Gies, who's a Chicago businessman, just a few blocks south of here on Madison Avenue, he's a graduate of our college, and when he donated $150 million, we convinced him to let us name the college after him. By the way, that is how it worked. He agreed to the money before he agreed to the naming. When he spoke very eloquently about the importance of our students kind of rising above their own self-interest and just the pursuit of money, and to really think about how to make the world a better place for them having been in it. Now, a few of you who may have heard me tell this story if you were at the 10th anniversary of the Cohen Center last spring. But what most people don't know about Larry Gies, and I asked him permission to tell this story, he's very active in a Christian church here in Chicago. He's raised his children Christian and so forth. What most people don't know is that his mother was Jewish and was born during the Holocaust in Amsterdam. And when she was only a few months old, her father got taken away to the concentration camps, and her mother figured that she was next. So she took Larry's mom to a Catholic orphanage in Amsterdam, put a rosary around her neck, and dropped her off. And she was raised in this orphanage for the next 5 years until some distant relatives found her at about the age of 5 or 6 and raised her in Amsterdam. And then she immigrated to the United States at the age of 18, moved out near Rockford, Illinois, got married, had a little boy named Larry, who 18 years later came to the University of Illinois and went on to build one of the largest and most successful private industries in the U.S., private companies in the world, actually. And he's really become an amazing example of being for much more than just oneself. He generously gives of his time, his money, his energy, and his passion, and in particular, whenever it involves our students. But as a result of his mom's and his family's experience and story, he really understands more than most the importance of creating an environment on our campus where every individual, regardless of their race, their religion, etc., can really pursue their higher purpose. Because he, like me, agrees that being for more than just yourself requires an outward focus and ideally a global perspective. The University of Illinois is one of the world's great research universities, and part of our strength, I believe, is our global impact and our global engagement. And I know you're going to hear about it a little bit later. When our students came back from Israel this spring, I know that they were energized and inspired by what they saw, by the entrepreneurs that they met that were solving social problems, not just looking out about how they were going to make more money. And it was really a transformative experience for them. So in my view, we're committed to continuing to engage with the world and not withdraw from it. We've got more work to do. As I said, we need to shift to being more proactive. in proactively educating our university community about religious bias. Rather than just reacting to BDS movements, we need to continue to loudly tell the stories about the positive things that come out of engaging with Israel. My basic goal is that by sharing the success stories that will come out of this cooperation with Israel, is that the BDS movement will simply find that the university is not a place where the movement's going to find any traction. Not today, not tomorrow, hopefully not ever. So I thank you for the time today. I think if we have time, I'm happy to take some more questions, or some questions, I should say.
Yes, we have time.
Good, thank you. And if there's no questions, that's fine too. Because I know one of our speakers wants to start early if he can.
Can you elaborate on some of the engagement with Israel on the part of the business school?
Sure. So, I mean, I just give you, the question was elaborate more on some of the engagement. And a lot of it's in its early stages, but one of the first things I did is ask, where do we take our students on study abroad trips? And for the most part, we weren't taking anybody to Israel. We had a lot of trips to China, we had trips to Brazil, we had trips to South Africa. So I said, let's add some trips to Israel. And in the first year of doing that, we got 2 trips. One of them was this honors program, James Scholar trip that you'll hear more about today. This year we have 3 of them going, so it's a start, right? We're getting students over there, and what was nice about the trip in the spring is these students that we took are a lot of the student leaders in the college. I mean, a large fraction of them are leading student organizations and so forth. And so the hope is that the impact's going to be much greater than the 40 students that we had. Second is, as I said, we've invited scholars just as part of our normal research seminars and so forth. Part of that was just making some money available to do that as a little bit of an extra incentive, not forcing it, allowing the faculty to then identify who they wanted to bring over, people that they'd be interested in hearing from, provided additional money for our own faculty to be able to submit papers that if they were accepted at these conferences in Israel, they would then have the resources to go without having to tap into their own research accounts. So it's just a series of things like that. Another example is Tel Aviv University has a group of students from it's run out of the College School, although it may be a broader group that comes to Chicago in the summer as part of their entrepreneurship program. We hosted them for part of the time at what was then called the Illini Center, is now the headquarters of the Discovery Partners Institute. We got our students that are part of our iVenture Accelerator, which is a student-run entrepreneurship program, a student entrepreneurship program run by the college, together with them to have that kind of engagement. We've started some conversations about whether we can sort of formalize that and maybe even have some teams that have students from both universities involved. So, I mean, those are some examples. And on the one hand, they feel really small, right? Very opportunistic things that we're doing to get started. But I think, again, what I sort of alluded to quickly earlier is I think if you can get this kind of thing started, let people know it's possible, you start to develop those relationships. I mean, no faculty member wants a dean telling them what to do research on or how to spend their time. But if you can facilitate that interaction and then it really gets going on its own, then hopefully 3, 5, 10 years from now, that will really blossom into something much more meaningful. Yeah. Somehow I ended up with 2 mics, so if you want one.
I'm Alan Walter from the University of Illinois in Chicago,
Yeah.
and the College of Business, and there we go. And so first of all, I just want to say this is, it's just a remarkable model overall for business schools, especially public universities, to, have this kind of engagement with Israel, and especially coming from the top. And you can see the importance of it coming from the dean's office, because then it's systematic, it's school-wide. I mean, you can have other universities or business schools where maybe there's one professor who's, has a relationship with Israel and has one class and takes 5 students and so forth. But this is, across the board and continuous, and it's ongoing, and so that is super important. I hope, that can be emulated at other universities. Now, I know also the trend these days in study abroad is very, very short-term programs. Students don't seem to want to go too long outside their comfort zones and so forth. But I hope Well, first of all, the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign Business School has a remarkable study abroad office with advisors and programs all over the world. I haven't seen anything quite that extensive. And when I was an undergrad there in the 80s, we wish we had something like that, because back then business students could hardly study abroad because they couldn't get business programs overseas that they could study in, so it was limited to liberal arts majors. And so I was wondering if there's any longer-term programs that are developing for business students. So overall, the University of Illinois only sends still a handful of students to Israel, maybe for a semester for the academic year. If that's something on the horizon for business or engineering students, maybe that would be maybe the next step.
Great question, and I hope so, but I can share. Let me give a little background, and then I'll share one of the challenges that we've got to sort through. So first of all, about 60% of our undergraduates do have some kind of a study abroad experience before they graduate. We'd like to get that close to 100%. I think we find that the 40% who don't do it, there's a small number of them that they're just trying to triple major or whatever and can't figure it out. For most of them, it is either financial or frankly just a psychological barrier. They've never been out of the country. That's often correlated with the financial piece of it. So we're looking at ways to do that, and of course it's, to some extent, it's about me going out and raising more money in order to make that happen. We have semester-long study abroad programs established with a lot of the schools in Israel. The problem is the academic calendars are so different. So I know when we went over there the 1st of November, I think the students had been on class for like a week, right? Where we were almost, we were 2/3 of the way done with our semester. And so that there's a simple logistical challenge there that I think, I don't know who's going to change their academic calendar to make that easier to solve, but that's a real issue that I think we're just going to have to figure out. We have had conversations, and again, I've had most of as a university, we've got connections to a lot of the schools in Israel. Within Geese, we're primarily working with Tel Aviv University right now, in the College School of Management, and it helps that, I'm the Joseph Lakanashak Dean, and Joseph was the advisor to the dean at the College School, and we've got all these great connections, but we also share a strong interest in entrepreneurship and innovation. We've been talking about ways that even during the semester, even if we can't get our students there or their students here for the whole semester, that we can get them working on projects together, getting them spend some time at each other's school, those kinds of things. It's a little too early to know which of those ideas are actually going to come to fruition, but we're certainly trying. I'd love to get 95% of our students studying abroad and a large number of them in Israel, but I'm not prepared to lay out an exact plan on how we're going to be able to do that. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. I don't have a question because what you are doing there is actually providing the answer to any question. Right? What you are doing is, but just we have a gap in Israel of skilled people in the startups. Right? So we are a startup nation with a gap in supply of talents. So all the 6 research universities in Israel are involved somehow with the business community. So what I can suggest, maybe for a longer period, but not for a full semester, is to offer internships in Israeli startups during the summer. Actually, at the MSU, there are already such a few students who came to Israel for the first time, engaged by startups. So then the financial problem is also not because they are paid somehow. Right. Someone must cover maybe the flight, but then they can work and make a living. And the Tel Aviv University, Hebrew University, which by the way is the new technology hub in Israel, and the Technion, obviously, which is already established under Ben-Gurion, they all are connected and they can help with this. So if you want to offer something at very low cost from the university administration, try to encourage internships in Israeli companies during the summer, that they can come on an academic visa for month, so maybe 2 months, July, August, during the time, and had a great experience with the same effect as a one full semester. So just, and if you
That's a
want
great
to
idea.
put you in contact with
I
people,
appreciate
I
that.
will do that.
Absolutely.
They offer this.
We'll exchange contact information when I'm done here. Yes, absolutely. So it looks,
Yeah, I think.
Looks like we need to-
Move on just for.
to move on out of respect for the other speakers, but thank you very much for your time.
I think Ellie wants to start at 1:45, so like now. He has a class at like 3.
Yeah, we're going to start right away with Ellie because he has a class to teach this afternoon, snow permitting.
Yeah, this is crazy. I'll introduce myself. I'm Eli Reches, and I am I'm Israeli. I've retired from Tel Aviv University, where I spent all of my academic life. I'm a visiting professor. I'm the Crown Visiting Professor at Northwestern. I think I'll go to Guinness Book of Records because typically a visiting professor is for 2 years, and I'm now finishing my 9th year.
It's the Arafat, it's the Abbas tenure.
Yeah. Thank you, Prince Charles. I love you too. Anyway, thank you for the invitation and thank you for the initiative. Extremely important and relates directly to what I'm going to talk about. I apologize that I have to leave early. First I thought Loyola for me, the Loyola at Rogers Park, till I found that there is life beyond Rogers Park. I have to leave early. Actually, I put the timer on. So I represent from all present Israel Studies, the program of Israel Studies. I don't think that there's other representatives of Israel Studies. Yes, sir, you are?
No, I'm affiliated with the Jewish Studies and Modern Israel Institute.
Okay, so good. Thank you. So it's good to know. And I want to share with you a new model that is work in progress at Northwestern, model that we developed in recent years and is directly related to the topic of today's convention. Let me begin with a few introductory words about Israel Studies at Northwestern. It was founded in 2013 on the basis of the traditional concept of similar Israel Studies centers elsewhere in the country, as part of the Crown Family Center for Jewish and Israel Studies. Its mission states the goal, oh my God, this is not good, promoting the academic studies of modern state of Israel through rigorous teaching, scholarship, and research based on academic diligence and interdisciplinary approaches aimed to study all facets of the modern state of Israel, focusing on history, politics, culture, economics of contemporary Israeli society. I will not be revealing a secret when I say that Israel's popularity on campus has been on the decline. In recent years, the anti-Israel movement, the BDS, Students for Justice in Palestine, have all been stepping up their efforts significantly and gathering momentum. Now, Israel Studies at Northwestern has been exploring new avenues to address this changing landscape at American campuses in general and at Northwestern in particular, which expresses this change, this shift expresses itself in lesser enrollment of students in Israel-focused humanities-oriented courses. Some of you may have witnessed this phenomenon. Similarly, so campus activities, Israel-related. I know AEN, this is your bread and butter. A general interest in Israel and growing anti-Israel activities. Now, I should emphasize that Israel Studies at NU is clearly not an advocacy group. It's clearly a scholarly, scholarship-focused academic group. In this atmosphere of BDS and academic hostility, we, and I have to admit, I speak here in pluralis majestatis, who is, when I say me, c'est moi. We looked for, but I was still out of being humble, keeps using the word we. We looked for innovative, original, groundbreaking ways to further enhance Israel studies, move away from the traditional concept, and think outside the box. This is the key word, think outside the box. We thus concluded that there is no reason why not to expand the traditional definition of Israel studies, be more inclusive, and include the exact sciences and other areas in the definition of Israel studies. This, of course, without throwing the baby with the water, as we say, that is still pursuing the traditional way. Now, one area that was relatively easy to go with was economics. We were fortunate to have enough funds to hire an Israeli professor, Yossi Zeira, who is now teaching regularly a basic course on Israeli economics. I don't know how long these funds will last, but yes, there is a regular course attended by almost 50 students, because this is a required course in econ, and this is a great success. He's from Hebrew U, he's coming on a regular basis. But concurrently, as I said, we were looking, trying to find additional areas, and we headed towards STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Math less so. The dean of the McCormick School of Engineering responded enthusiastically and immediately proposed to begin cooperation in the field of water in Israel. Our dean, Weinberg, the humanities dean, agreed to the challenge, and the strategy which we adopted on the basis of collaboration between humanities and engineering was based on 3 pillars: teaching, organizing symposia, and the most recent pillar that was added this summer, field trips to Israel. So let me say a few words about each of these pillars. Teaching, we immediately developed a course co-taught by a professor from the engineering school, McCormick School of Engineering, and myself, entitled Water in Israel and the Middle East, Resilience, Sustainability, and Security. Now, the importance of this is that this is a teaching element. It's a course that has now been going, this would be the 4th year. It's a seminar, capped at 15. We've had between 8 and 12 students each year, which is good. Course provides an overview of climatic and geographical issues, limitations on water availability in Israel and the Middle East. It was important for us to add the Middle East element so that it would not be narrowed down to Israel proper, to avoid. But the special thing about it that it discusses ancient and modern societal responses to these limitations, defines opportunities for development of sustainable solutions for regional stability and prosperity. Aaron Peckman, my colleague from environmental engineering, does the engineering aspects of water technology in Israel. And I myself lecture on the historical aspects, such as water in ancient time, during the mandatory period, drying of the marshes, flourishing of the desert, and the national water carrier. So it's a good combination, and we both deal with how water scarcity spurs new developments in water use. I now move to the second pillar, I said teaching, symposia. We organize an annual symposia on water in Israel and the Middle East. Now will be the 4th annual symposia. 6 speakers from the US and Israel, 1 or 2 from Israel. I will not expand on this because time is running. The most recent one dealt with transboundary issues, an extremely relevant and important topic. So the title was Transboundary Water and Collaborative Solutions. Well attended. We also, it becomes part of the seminar. We collaborate, we integrate the symposium into the seminar program so that students, we have captive audience of at least 10 students that they have to come. So this is good. But of course we had the public audience also is interested, and faculty. Parenthetically, I would add that this is a conceptual revolution, definitely for me. I'm a student of history, and the mere idea that I have to walk every day 15 minutes to the tech building and go into the engineering department, it took me a while. Trust me, it was not easy. Number 1, to walk 15 minutes over there. Number 2, to walk into these, they're all engineers, and this is a different brand. These guys are different. They have something different. Because the moment they enter school, they already graduate. In the sense that they already think, what am I going to do once I graduate? And I will relate to that when I speak about the third element, the field trip. Anyway, it is also a transformational moment for those who deal with Jewish and Israel studies the traditional way. For me to come up with this idea to introduce courses in, water is the beginning. Nanotechnology is coming up. It's not easy, and I'm not joking. They come to me and say, are you out of your mind? What do you need nanotechnology? What is wrong with Israel in the 1920s, 1930s? You know, the history of Zionism. And I said earlier, we don't throw the baby with the water. These are good, we continue with that. But we open new avenues. And this is the new model that I introduced to you today. Anyway, let's go on page 5, and I still have at least 4 pages. So, the symposium, I told you, transboundary, and this year, for example, we will deal with drought. Number 1 in Israel. I don't know if you are aware of how bad the drought is, but it is really a national problem. The Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, Kinneret is, you can almost walk to the center of Lake Kinneret. I'm exaggerating, of course, you got to know me for the last 5 minutes, and I'm a bit of a drama queen, so, but you can walk really a good part of the Kinneret. I don't know when you've last been to the Kinneret. So drought in Israel, drought in Syria. Drought is one of the main reasons that caused the humanitarian crisis in Syria, which led to the collapse of the Syrian state and so forth. So we will be dealing with drought. You will all be getting invitation, and I hope you will be able to make it. And now I come to the flagship of the new project, and this is GET, the acronym of Global Engineering Track, I guess. Yes, Israel Global Engineering Track. So we added a 3rd layer this year, and this is a field trip for engineering students to Israel, which allowed 12 freshmen and sophomores, period. No junior, no seniors, and not accidentally so. I'll explain in a minute. From programs spanning social sciences, natural sciences, and engineering, mostly, to experience Israel's water challenges and emerging solutions through 2-week short course. Israel is chosen as an ideal venue owing to, number one, its global leadership in water technology, 2, its arid climate necessitating innovating water solutions, and number 3, and here is the interesting combination which makes Israel special, its extraordinary historical and cultural significance. It's this unique combination between the techniques of water conservation and irrigation in ancient time, and this is where I come in, because otherwise what do I have to do there, as Israel studies, and ultramodern and advanced technologies of present-day Israel, which made the visit so special. So 12 freshmen and sophomore, we had additional, and I go into detail here because I want to share with you the model which came to be modestly so successful. 2 student reporters from Medill School of Journalism who documented the group's activity, conducted interviews with participants, and prepared stories for transmission through multiple news media. So this was very well calculated beforehand. Get Water was structured around 3 geographical centers of activity: Lower Galilee and the major population center of Tel Aviv 1, Jerusalem and the Jordan River Valley 2, and the Negev Desert 3. The sites visited included the National Water Carrier, both the Eshkol Water Treatment Site and the Sapir Water Pumping Station, those who are familiar a little bit with the National Water Carrier. The Shafdan Recycling Site in central Israel, the Sorek Desalination Plant, well known, then the 3 academic center, 1 the Technion, 2 Tau, Tel Aviv University, and 3 Ben Gurion University, the campus at Sde Boker. Now, it's important to highlight the collaboration with Israeli universities, directly and indirectly. Now, the additional explorations focused on archaeological sites, because this was the uniqueness of the trip. To see water system and water infrastructure during ancient times and move to present day sites like the desalination in Sorek, which within 1 hour you drink fresh water being drilled from the Mediterranean an hour before. Well, that's what they say, but you know, we went through this, and this is seemingly the truth. So this transition from the old to the new, we went to Caesarea and checked the ancient port and the sewage problem that Herod developed. Of course, Masada, how was water transported, thank you, up to the mountain. And then the Dead Sea, of course, and En-Gedi, the springs of En-Gedi, and so forth and so forth. The kids were amazed. By the way, I'll give you some information about the students, but most of them have not been overseas. Sophomores, and they didn't have yet the opportunity to go on study abroad. Fascinating. So I said the archaeological sites included Masada, Caesarea, Nahal Taninim, those who are familiar with the Israeli sites, and of course Jerusalem. The students were able to juxtapose the old and the new technologies. The trip took over 12 days, 2 travel days, 10 days in activity. The previous speaker spoke about the problem with quarters and semesters and trying to, this was done during the break, the summer break. The problem was Jewish holidays. So it fell within Jewish holidays, and we had, of all tourists, we had Yom Kippur falling in. What?
You could change that.
Yes, how? Prince Charles, maybe you have solution, but the solution we found was, and you know, everything comes to a standstill. Well, we had it, we arranged it to be, that will be in Tel Aviv, and they all went to the beach. So this was a day off, and everybody was happy about that. Anyway, what is interesting is that 31 students applied for the program, and only 12 were selected, and all were accepted. So it's interesting, there was a demand for this. And that's why I'm talking about the success of this program. I'm good. Students cohort found GET beneficial as it exposed them to the recent scientific breakthroughs in water technology and water resources management at a very early stage of their educational career. That's why I told you, they get into the tech building and they already choose professors known to be giving good recommendations. I'm not joking. They already think about graduation and where they can get a good recommendation letter for their next job. So they are already looking for places where they can do, what do they call it? Internship, thank you. And this is exactly what we did. Because we introduced them to places where they can potentially apply to, and already 2 students have applied to internships, one at the Beersheba campus of BGU, and one is trying to get a place in Tel Aviv, but it's still pending, also because of the time. So this was extremely important to them. So we wanted them to develop contacts at universities, companies, and other institutions in Israel, which provide extensive, by the way, also NGOs, EcoPeace, but again, it was the holidays and it was difficult to coordinate. Well, it was encouraged, this program was particularly encouraged at Northwestern, which lays immense emphasis on globalization. At Northwestern, you want to succeed, say 5 times a day globalization. Trust me. You can teach Talmud and say globalization, you're good. I'm joking, of course, but this is the truth. Now, furthermore, students are asked to maintain a daily journal and blog to reflect upon their experience. They take a pre- and post-program survey to assess their experiences, as well as follow-up surveys 6 months and 2 years after the completion of the program to learn how the participation has affected their undergraduate studies plans and global career perspectives. So I'm sharing with you all the details to give you an idea how I think well prepared this program is. Blogs, social media, communication groups, through the Water Center, the Crown Center, the Buffett Center, and ISEN, the Institute of Sustainability and Energy at Northwestern. I wouldn't bore you with some of the comments of the students. By the way, it was well advertised after the program was over. One important comment, the program was not supported in any way by any governmental agency. It was not supported by the Israeli consulate. I don't think that Israeli consulate still to date knows about it. Maybe yes, maybe not, but it doesn't matter. We did it totally independently. No financial support of any kind. It was all supported by the way, the student paid a symbolic price, but it was all Northwestern funded. And nothing of the birthright type tours, no hasbara, no nothing.
Ellie, how many of the kids that went on the program were Jewish? Any of them?
What? Interesting. Of the 12 kids, if I may use the word, one was Jewish.
Of the 30-something applicants.
Sorry? This I don't know. I didn't check that. But of the 12 which went, actually the 14 with the two reporters, one was Jewish. Very interesting. I don't know what it means, but for us, of course, if you look at the Israel studies point of view, I think it's important. Only one was Jewish. And with her Jewishness, she can be, well, I don't, delete. Delete, the lighter, I'm on the last page, guys. So we also support, along this line, we also support material science and engineering. And this is something that you know about, the project that is done jointly with Tel Aviv University, the Faculty of Engineering, David Zeitman. But here is the concluding point, which I think is important and relevant. As the Bible says, Vayar Kitov. You know, I saw this working, and I had this direction already in my mind. And actually, I gave it a name, Facing North, because the tech and the sciences at Northwestern are on the northern part of campus. So I named it Facing North. And actually, I think about approaching North Face, the jacket. Maybe they can sponsor us. It's not a bad idea. I can promote them. Facing North. Well, not bad idea, huh? Still find it difficult to pronounce his name, who is a big name at Northwestern. He's the head of ISEN. Some of you are familiar with the term ISEN. And I prepared the dossier, and like I'm heading to the Supreme Court it didn't take me half an hour to come out with a course. Exactly the model of the water. And we have a course coming up, a joint course, the same model of the water. And he is already ready to discuss a trip similar to the water on renewable. In other words, you know, I was almost preaching to the convert, as if he was waiting for me to come. So this is going well. And next in line, we have computer sciences. Perhaps you know the name Uri Vilensky, who is one of the group that used to convene under, blessed be his soul, Michael Kotzin. And then indeed nanotechnology. Nanotechnology with Tamar Zeitman. Also what you need is one righteous person to collaborate with. And then the rest. And the financial investment is not that big. And then, of course, startups, sir. You mentioned startup in the business school. We have made a few trials. It's more complicated, but it's doable. I agree with you, and I would like to continue the discussion. I know of you. School of Education and numerous opportunities. This is what I have to tell you. This is a new direction. It's reconceptualization of the traditional Israel studies concept. I think it opens new horizons. It provides a new basis for the presence of Israel studies on American campuses. To tell you frankly, when I go north, I stand there proudly. I don't have to be apologetic. People come to me. I don't have to go to them. They seek my advice. They seek my cooperation. And it's a totally new world. I sleep much better at night. It is as if I'm joking, but this is not the case. I tell you the truth. People are kind to me. What? Microphone? Well, it's my ending remarks. And, you know, I can speak much more of it, but unfortunately I have to leave. So if there is one or two quick questions, I'll be happy to answer. Who forget the students, they can wait. Yes, Ellen.
And it certainly fits with what our two gentlemen earlier spoke about problem solving and applied knowledge, which is critical today in the globalized world. My question is, was the issue, and I don't know if it's an issue, in Israel, is there any disparity within neighborhoods as to the water that they receive? Such as we would have in Flint, Michigan, a problem, or is there one component of water that all neighborhoods? Would we experience any inequality in the delivery of that service?
No.
No. That was my question.
Yes.
One is good gesagt and well said and mostly well done.
Thank you.
Well done in doing this.
Terrific.
Because, you know, when Ellie shared some of this early on with me, and frankly, I began to think about this, and I think this is what he's proposing. This should be the future model of Israel studies. You know, it is not to say that the model which has been promoted, let's call it cultural studies, it should be left to wither. Obviously,
No, I highlighted this several times.
Right.
I emphasized this several times, and I want to tell you, the traditionalists are intimidated by this.
Yeah.
I highlighted. They don't like me.
Yeah, but I think.
Well, there may be other reasons.
I love you too, Prince Charles.
But part, you know, Ellie, I think part of the success, and I think it's happening already, is when those in the north will name the program Facing the South. So you know, they should, you know, and perhaps I mean, I'm looking at this from it's you who don't want to sit still, right? And do new things, but it's also the historical perspective, which I think the lack of history for I think has a lot to do with a lack of understanding Israel. That's a different issue. But you know, I think this can be a model that every university does for Israel studies. You need scale, you need talent all across the campus, and you need some resources. But for me, I'm hearing the old area studies centers, right, which used to be came out of the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Title VI.
Centers, and now those have lost favor in Congress. But the truth is, to do something like this, it's not trivial money, but to have a center for Israel studies, let's call it, the study of the state of Israel, and not just what Israel has to offer as a nation, and not just as a Jewish nation. That's a prejudice on my part. I mean, I think, you know, a $5 million gift would be enough.
The funny thing about it doesn't take that much money. You know, it's.
No, but it's 5 million that generates.
I'll take the 5 million, but
A couple $100,000.
But it doesn't. You know, this whole thing about this track, this summer track, is what?
Yeah.
30,000, 40K. That's all.
No, but so if you would generate a $5 million gift is going to generate $200,000 a year for expenditures. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I want to explain. I know, Charles, you want to say something, but I want to explain. This is not mutually exclusive. I mean, this is not, you don't throw all the traditional thing away. A center, and this is my dream. I have a dream. My dream is to add a new component to the Israel studies traditional concept. This is all. I'm not trying to rebuild it. I'm just expanding the traditional concept and adding a new element that I think would revive the traditional, because, as I said before, the traditional concept is losing ground. Israel and Jewish studies are losing ground, dear friends. And you can try it everywhere. I mean, this is, talk to anybody.
The great advantage of doing
Yes.
what you're doing is that in a subtle way, it completely normalizes Israel. It's a place where you do research on this or high technology or water resources rather than thinking of everything in geopolitical terms.
Correct.
Okay. I want to give you a couple of ways to historically situate this, even for an engineering school, just very quickly. The first is I always tell my students, think of mid-19th century Russians harvesting grain. What do you think of? You think of them with a scythe and harvesting. Think of the little house on the prairie. There's nobody with a scythe, right? Why? We're a labor-short country. Chicago innovation, the McCormick Reaper, and then the Combine, what is all of that? It's all labor-saving devices. A lot of engineering technology is to deal with bottlenecks in your economy. The John Deere plow was because he basically put a saw on the end of a plow. It was the only way to cut into a deep, into this overgrown grassland. So engineers solve real problems, and I think you can talk about many of the problems like water in Israel in the same way. And the second is that I think that these students, many of them don't know the concept of creative destruction. They don't understand the idea that in order for the new to grow up, you have to allow the old or the failed ideas to go away. And in part, Israel is very strong on that. It used to not be. There was a substantial political decision made to do away with the old socialist model of industries that were all about employment and sluggish and so forth. So I think that those are, especially the idea that engineers solve problems, and here's some Israeli problems, and I think you can link them to the history of the Midwest, which they would understand.
I fully agree, and I really, if this renewable energy collaboration works out, hopefully for next year, and we already have two, I think we are on the way to start exporting the merchandise. And so two things in practical terms. I think, Ken, that a smaller group of the participants here should perhaps meet and further explore the ideas that came up today. Like the gentleman whose name? Harry? And others who have relevant, how, to sit and brainstorm as to how to promote the ideas that were brought up. And number two, hopefully someone can pick up the ideas that we are exploring, let me say experimentally at this stage, and along with Israel Studies, maybe the Israel Studies Institute, maybe with Itamar and the folks from Washington can bring it out, because, how long will they extend my contract as visiting professor? And there's a limit to everything. Thank you very much.